My current guest knows firsthand what it's like to go up against the U.S. government in defense of the First Amendment. James Goodale was general counsel and vice chair of the New York Times when the Pentagon Papers were published, and he joins RT now for an exclusive sit-down interview. Mr. Goodale, thank you for taking the time to speak with me.
You're entirely welcome. Glad to be here.
In your new book, Fighting for the Press, Inside the Story of the Pentagon Papers and Other Battles, you indicate that President Nixon was out to destroy the New York Times. But you also argue that if President Obama succeeds at prosecuting Julian Assange, he will be worse than Nixon for press freedom. Why so?
Well, let me just say one thing about Nixon. He was out to destroy the New York Times. He was out to destroy Brookings Institution, a lot of institutions in the United States. President Obama is not out to destroy the Times. What we're talking about is a narrow, it's not so narrow, but it's a discrete area, which is the relationship of the press to national security. Pentagon Papers case, a case about national security. Now, in that area, Nixon was terrible, okay? He happened to also be terrible in the whole First Amendment area. Obama, by contrast, okay in the First Amendment area, but not okay in national security. Why? Because Obama has, first of all, pursued 6 leakers. That's the first bad thing he's done. Second bad thing he's done is he pursued a guy who got a leak whose name is James Risen. Now, what am I worried about? He's also pursuing Julian Assange. I say if he pursues Julian Assange and says Julian Assange is a co-conspirator, then he'll be, and succeeds, he'll be worse than Nixon, because Nixon tried to pursue the New York Times and its reporters saying they were co-conspirators. Nixon failed. So Obama succeeds where Nixon failed, he'll be worse than Nixon.
So in this context, you view Julian Assange as the publisher, similar to the New York Times, similar to The Guardian, and all the other news outlets that then published what Julian Assange disclosed through WikiLeaks, right?
That's
You're saying
correct.
that it's the same thing. If
everyone's on the same plane. I mean, it's like if you had a website yourself and you published this interview, you're a publisher.
U.S. officials maintain that Julian Assange compromised national security by publishing classified documents. Now, as you know, in America, sometimes First Amendment is trumped by national security issues when information is disclosed that could threaten the lives of soldiers on the battlefield or threaten the lives of Americans here at home. Do you believe, honestly, that Julian Assange should face no consequences whatsoever?
Yes, that's right. And so why? The same claims were made about the New York Times when it published the Pentagon Papers. It was destroying national security, it was destroying lives, so forth and so on. The First Amendment, in that case, trumped the claim of the Nixon administration. Now, here you've got to ask yourself, well, what is the First Amendment claim? The claim is that Assange can't be punished if, in fact, there's no clear and present danger to the country. And if you look at the stuff that Assange published, I would argue there's no clear and present danger to the country. I mean, it's been 3 years. Where's the danger? I mean, you're still here and I'm still here. All claims sound terrible when it comes to national security, but when you look backwards at them, which is what I do in my book, this is the Pentagon Papers. I look backwards into the facts of what happened in the Pentagon Papers. And nobody home, nothing there, no damage to national security. You have to look at these claims with a jaundiced eye, because after a period of time, you take a look at them and there's no danger.
As you mentioned, the Obama administration has prosecuted more alleged leakers than under the Espionage Act than all previous administrations combined. Do you believe that leakers such as Bradley Manning should be subject to some discipline?
Yes, I do. And I would think that if you worked for this organization and you started leaking their secrets, you probably ought to be fired. I think every organization ought to have a control over its employees. And therefore, I think that Bradley Manning should be disciplined. And I think that the 20 years to which he's agreed probably is a good sentence. I think the question with Bradley Manning right now is he's agreed to 20, and the government wants to give him life. And I just wonder whether that's appropriate. But I do believe every organization should be able to discipline its employees.
Okay, then do you fault the U.S. Department of Justice of trying to find out who the leakers are? Because as you well know, there's been a scandal with the DOJ secretly obtained the phone records from Associate Press journalists, and also obtained a warrant to search the email account of a Fox News reporter. So do you defend the U.S. government in trying to find out who the leakers are?
Well, I think there's two things. One, we've got 6 prosecutions of leakers, 3 in the whole history of the United States before then. Everyone leaks in Washington because everyone's got access to national security information. I think that what the Obama ought to do is dial it back. He's dialed it back on drones. 6 is too many. There ought to be some discretion, because once you start getting everybody, some of these cases blow up in your face. That's the first question. Then the second question is how you go about it, okay? I don't think when the government is concerned about the behavior of its own employees, that it ought to take the press and throw the press into the middle of it, which is what they have done in what we call Rosengate. Rosen is the reporter for Fox News who was subject to a search warrant. A search warrant on the theory he was a co-conspirator with a gentleman named Kim. I mean, I look at you, you don't look like a co-conspirator to me. But if you were to start covering some Washington stories, which inevitably involved national security information, you're subject to being called a co-conspirator. You know, legally I could give you a song and dance, but just for your viewers, in terms of common sense, we know reporters aren't co-conspirators, and we know their records shouldn't be subject to search warrants. Come on, lay off, President Obama.
So why do you think they're doing it? Do you think they're doing it to intimidate U.S. journalists from seeking information and publishing these reports on national security issues?
I mean, what if they did that to your colleague here? You would be intimidated. Or if indeed they did it to you, would be intimidated the next time around. They're also trying to intimidate those who leak. And as I said, I think they should use some discretion there, because, you know, when the president speaks to you, he's leaking. You ever thought about that? Because every piece of information in Washington, particularly the information which he's got his hands on, is classified. Of course, he can declassify, but it doesn't make any sense to me. So the impact is that we have less information, we have less power, you and me, and the government, by keeping the information secret, you know, they're a huge, complex. They become more powerful, and that's not good for any of us.
Now, as a result of the AP and Fox News scandals, the New Yorker magazine has launched a platform for whistleblowers to secretly leak information. The program is called Strongbox, and it's an open source Dropbox that allows anyone to send leaked documents or messages without their identities ever being known. So this way, if the Justice Department asks anyone from the New Yorker magazine, where did you get this information? Who was your source? The New Yorker says, well, we don't know. Don't you find it interesting that the New Yorker is now using the First Amendment practices of Julian Assange to protect the Bradley Mannings of the world?
Right. And it doesn't surprise me at all, because that's what the New Yorker should be doing in the digital age. That's what publishers do. And by the way, after the Julian Assange story broke, the New York Times said, well, we're going to set one up, and I think the Wall Street Journal set one up too. Now Assange is saying, Obama is saying, I want to get Assange. But Assange is just like the New Yorker, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. He might as well go and get the New York Times too, and that's what I'm here to say I'm scared about.
During his national speech on Thursday, President Obama actually did say that he's troubled by the possibility that the Department of Justice investigations into leaks may chill the type of journalism that holds government accountable. As a result, he announced that he's calling on Congress to pass a media shield law to guard against government overreach. Right. Do you think that will help? Do you think that will do anything, or do you think that's just rhetoric that the president's using?
I think it's probably both. What he said was, I want Chuck Schumer, who's our senator from New York, to put the bill in. So Schumer gets up and says, look, I'm going to put it in. But first of all, we're going to have an exception for WikiLeaks. It's not going to cover WikiLeaks, okay? And then the second thing he says is not going to cover national security. We'll have a national security exception. Well, I will say in defense of Schumer that the old bill on which this is based didn't completely eliminate all national security leaks, but it had a provision in there that made it very difficult to justify it. So I have a question whether that is worth the candle, but gee whiz, my friend Julian Assange, he's not going to get the protection after we find out the New Yorker's doing the same thing he's doing.
There have certainly been some cases where journalists have abused their power. A recent example is that Bloomberg reporters are now facing somewhat of a scandal. They've been accused of accessing private data on the Bloomberg terminal to further their reporting. Do you see this as a big deal in terms of what?
I think that's a big deal. I mean, that's a little bit like the Murdoch scandal in London. You know, when the Murdoch papers were doing the same thing, they're hacking in. These people aren't actually hacking, I would suppose, but it's the same effect. You've got to have privacy for your emails, but I'm not defending the Bloomberg journalists. I think we got to realize that we're in a new world, digital world, and we've got to get clear what the rules are, because it's so easy to cheat.
You've been called the father of reporters' privileges. What do you see as the current threats to press freedom in the United States?
Frankly, it's President Obama and Rosengate. And I'll tell you why, because this is the first time I hate to use the word Espionage Act, but you know, a National Security Act, let's say for your viewers, has been used to get reporters. I mean, that really is frightening because it's usually used to get leakers. And Rosen's a leaky, to use legal phraseology. So if the Obama administration, or at least his Justice Department, thinks that they can use criminal laws to get journalists because they're co-conspirators, I mean, honestly, that's one of the worst things I've come across in all the years I've been doing this.
And in closing, I mentioned your book when we began the interview. What do you hope that readers get from your book?
Well, the purpose of the book is to learn the lessons from the Pentagon Papers, which is, hey, any president that messes with national security is going to be in deep yogurt. Wake up, America, and wake up President Obama. The country's going to be in bad shape. And President Obama, hey, don't go after Julian Assange and call him a co-conspirator. That's bad for everybody. So,
did you send him a copy of your book?
You know, that's a good idea.
Maybe you should. Yeah. Mr. Goodell, thank you very much for your time.